The wind screamed across the barren plains, carrying dust like sharp knives that cut at the skin. The land was dying, cracked and gasping under the weight of a summer that had overstayed its welcome. Two figures stood alone beneath a crooked oak, its blackened branches clawing at the sky. A freshly dug grave stretched between them like a wound refusing to heal. Eliza Callahan pressed her hand against the worn wood of the simple cross they had hammered together that morning. Her father's name, etched with a shaking knife, looked too small, too final. She swallowed the lump in her throat, standing straight even as the world seemed determined to beat her down. Clara wept silently beside her, a handkerchief crumpled uselessly in her hands. She was the younger sister by 6 years, her face still soft where Eliza's had been carved by hardship and loss. Their black dresses hung heavy on their frames, ill-fitting and old, but there was no one left to care how they looked. Eliza broke the silence first. "Come on, Clara," she said, her voice like gravel. "Ain't no good standin' here when the stock still needs feedin'." Clara sniffled, nodding. She stumbled after her sister as they made their way back to the ranch house, a sagging, weary thing that seemed to droop further with every passing day. The Callahan ranch had once been proud. 40 head of cattle, 3 good horses, and a barn that could weather a twister. Now it was a graveyard of empty stalls and broken fences. The cattle rustled off one desperate night weeks before their father's heart gave out. Inside the house, the air was thick with the scent of dust and old sorrow. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, poring over a stack of bills. Each envelope was another nail in the coffin. Taxes overdue. Bank debts outstanding. Foreclosure warnings. She pressed her palms into her eyes until the darkness turned red. Clara hovered in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Maybe we could ask the sheriff for help," she ventured timidly. Eliza looked up sharply. "Sheriff's just waitin' for us to fail, Clara. Man like him don't help out o' kindness. He's got eyes on this land. Always has." Clara's shoulders sagged. She moved to the stove and stirred the thin soup simmering there. It was mostly water and hope. Night fell hard and fast. Coyotes howled in the distance, their cries a lonesome chorus. As they ate in silence, Eliza's mind worked furiously, chewing over every miserable option. They could sell the ranch for pennies, but to who? The vultures that circled weren't offering enough to buy a decent mule, let alone start fresh somewhere else. The next morning brought no miracles. Only dust and heat and another visit from Mr. Calvin Green, the bank agent. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Morning, Miss Callahan. I'm afraid I have to insist again. If you can't make payment by month's end, the property reverts to the bank." Eliza's jaw tightened. "I understand, Mr. Green. You can see yourself off my land now." He chuckled, a low, oily sound. "Just business, ma'am. Nothing personal." As his carriage rattled away, Clara kicked at the dirt, her face twisted with frustration. "We can't keep going like this, Eliza. We need help." Eliza stared at the horizon, where the heat made the hills shimmer like a cruel mirage. Pride warred with desperation in her chest. She had promised Pa she would keep the ranch, but at what cost? She couldn't do it alone, and she couldn't let them lose everything. That night, Clara approached her with a newspaper, smoothed and worn from many readings. "There's something here," Clara said hesitantly, pointing to a small advertisement in the corner. The letters were cramped, almost apologetic. "Seeking reliable marriage. Strong hands needed for ranch work. Ladies of good standing. Contact for correspondence." Eliza barked a humorless laugh. "Mail-order husbands? That's your plan." Clara's cheeks burned. "It ain't dignified, I know. But what other choice do we have? We don't have brothers. No cousins. Nobody left. Men don't respect women runnin' a ranch." Eliza turned the idea over in her mind like a sharp stone. It cut at her pride, at everything Pa had taught her about standing on her own 2 feet. But she saw Clara's wide, hopeful eyes, and she saw the ranch falling apart around them. The wolves were already at the door. "Fine," she said, the word tasting like ash. Write the damn letter. Weeks bled together after that, each one heavier than the last. For a time, they dared not hope. The well pump broke. One of the last 2 horses went lame. The corn shriveled in the fields. Then, like a spark in dry grass, a letter arrived. Eliza opened it with trembling fingers, sitting at the kitchen table while Clara leaned over her shoulder. The words were neat and respectful. A man named Thomas Granger from Virginia claimed to be seeking honest work, a new start. A widower, he said, skilled with livestock, letters of recommendation to prove his worth. A week later, another letter came. This one rougher, the handwriting scrawled and uneven. Silas Boone, formerly of Texas. No fancy words. Just a plain promise. I can work. I can fight. I ain't afraid of hard livin'. Clara clutched the letters to her chest like lifelines. They're comin', Eliza. They're really comin'. Eliza gave a grim nod. She still didn't trust it, but the alternative was giving up. And she would not, could not give up. The day they arrived, the air was thick with tension. Eliza stood on the porch, rifle cradled in her arms, watching the trail. Clara smoothed her hair for the 50th time, a nervous flutter in her stomach. The first to appear was Thomas Granger. He rode a fine-looking bay, wearing a clean gray coat and a hat tilted just so. He dismounted with easy grace, offering a broad, charming smile. "Miss Callahan," he said, tipping his hat. "A pleasure." He was tall, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Clara practically glowed. Behind him, a second rider approached, slower, heavier. Silas Boone was a different sort entirely. Broad-shouldered, scarred across the jaw, he wore a battered duster and a look that said he trusted no living soul. His horse was a lean, ugly thing, but it moved like a shadow. Silas said nothing when he dismounted, only gave a curt nod. His rifle stayed slung across his back, his hand never straying far from it. Introductions were awkward and brief. Thomas charmed Clara effortlessly, spinning tales of the lush Virginia hills and his dream of starting anew. Silas said little, but his sharp gaze took in every sagging board, every broken fence post. Over supper, Thomas waxed poetic about the East, about dances and good breeding, about the hope of civilization reaching even this far corner of the world. Clara listened, enraptured, her laughter soft and musical. Eliza, meanwhile, watched Silas pick at his food. He ate like a man used to hunger, fast and without ceremony. When he caught her staring, he met her gaze unflinching. There was a weight to him, a coiled energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. After dinner, Clara and Thomas walked out into the yard, talking in low voices. Eliza stayed behind, washing dishes with Silas sitting silent at the table. "You don't talk much," she said finally, the scrape of crockery loud in the stillness. He shrugged. "Talkin' never fixed nothin'." She gave a short laugh. "You'll fit right in, then." Outside, the sky darkened to deep indigo. Coyotes howled in the distance. Silas stood and moved to the porch, his rifle across his lap. He sat there like a stone figure, eyes scanning the dark hills. Eliza watched him from the doorway, feeling a strange twist in her gut. She didn't trust him. Didn't trust Thomas either, truth be told. But the ranch needed strong backs. She needed strong backs. She needed them. As the moon rose high, casting cold light across the dying fields, Eliza leaned against the doorframe and listened to the night. Somewhere out there, danger brewed. She could feel it in her bones. In the stillness, Silas spoke without turning his head. "You ever wonder what a man's runnin' from when he answers a letter like that?" Eliza's throat tightened. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. They were all running from something. And by the time they figured out what these men had left behind, it might be too late to run at all. The days that followed passed in a blur of hard work and wary glances. The 2 new men threw themselves into the ranch chores with a vigor that couldn't be faked, mending fences, repairing the barn, and coaxing the stubborn fields into something like productivity. Sweat darkened their shirts before noon each day, and the calluses on their hands grew thicker by the hour. Thomas was all smiles and easy charm, tossing Clara into fits of laughter with exaggerated tales of frontier life and gentlemanly misadventures. He worked hard enough to be respected, but never so hard as to dirty the fine polish that clung to him like a second skin. Silas, by contrast, barely spoke. He rose before the sun, fixed what was broken, and fought the land like it had insulted his mother. He moved with a predator's patience, quiet and calculating. Clara called him the bear, but only half in jest. Eliza noticed other things too. Little things. Thomas's boots, for one, too fine for a man down on his luck. Polished leather didn't come cheap, and he never missed an opportunity to flash his winning smile at Clara, or to let his hand linger on her shoulder a second too long. Silas carried the opposite kind of trouble. Scars crisscrossed his knuckles and his jawline, old and vicious. Once, Eliza caught him cleaning a small pistol at the edge of the barn. The weapon was worn from use, not neglect. That was the kind of man who had killed before. Maybe often. Still, she couldn't deny the result. For the first time in months, the ranch began to breathe again. The fences stood tall. The water pump, once choked with rust, flowed freely. They even found a few stray calves wandering the low hills, half-starved but salvageable. One evening, after a long day of fixing the roof, Thomas sauntered up to the porch where Clara and Eliza were sitting with lemonade and sewing. "Ladies," he drawled, flashing that ever-ready grin, "I wonder if I might take Miss Clara for a little ride tomorrow. Thought we might see if the wildflowers are still about by the creek." Clara blushed so deep it nearly matched the sunset. Eliza set her sewing down carefully. "She ain't goin' nowhere without a chaperone." Thomas chuckled, hands raised in mock surrender. Of course. Pure intentions, Miss Callahan." The next morning, Clara wore her best bonnet and a smile that could have lit the whole valley. They rode out, leaving a trail of dust behind them. Eliza watched them go, arms folded tight across her chest. She spent the day working with Silas, repairing the corral where the fence had collapsed under a summer storm months ago. Silas said little, but his presence was steady, dependable. When the sun reached its peak, he wiped his brow with a rag and glanced at her. "You don't like him much," he said. Eliza shrugged. "Don't know I'm." "That's wise," Silas muttered. They worked in silence after that, but Eliza's mind kept turning. What exactly was Thomas hiding behind all that easy talk and polished charm? Clara returned near sundown, her cheeks flushed and eyes sparkling. She talked nonstop through supper, recounting how Thomas had picked her wildflowers, how he spoke of building a life here, of planting orchards and raising children. Eliza smiled thinly, saying little. She wanted to believe. She wanted to trust. But in the pit of her stomach, something heavy gnawed at her peace. The first real crack came 2 nights later. The sisters were closing up the barn when they heard the distant thunder of hooves. Riders fast and hard. Eliza dropped the lantern, heart slamming against her ribs. Silas burst from the bunkhouse, rifle in hand. Thomas was close behind, a pistol tucked into his belt. From the ridge, 4 men appeared, silhouetted against the moonlight. Rough-looking, dirty, armed. They didn't ride like cowhands looking for strays. They rode like men looking for trouble. The leader reined in first, shouting down at them. "Granger, we know you're here. Ain't no use hidin'." Thomas froze. His hand hovered near his pistol, but he didn't draw. Eliza turned to him sharply. "They're here for you?" Thomas swallowed, the smooth mask slipping from his face. For a moment, she saw the naked fear beneath. "Eliza, I can explain." "Now ain't the time," Silas growled. He moved toward the barn door, crouched low, eyes darting for cover. The riders didn't wait. Gunfire exploded into the night. Bullets tore through the side of the barn. Wood splintered. Horses screamed. Inside, Eliza shouted, dragging Clara by the arm. They ducked behind the heavy feed troughs as lead tore through the air above them. Thomas hesitated, caught between running and fighting. In the end, he scrambled after them. Silas returned fire with cold efficiency, picking his shots, never wasting a bullet. One of the riders yelped and dropped from his saddle. The others circled wide, out of sight. "You want to tell me why you brought hell to my doorstep?" Eliza hissed at Thomas, her voice like a whip. He was pale, sweating. "It's not what you think. I used to work security for a stagecoach line. One shipment went missing. They thought I took it." "You take it?" Silas asked flatly, eyes never leaving the shadows. Thomas shook his head furiously. "No. I swear it. But they didn't care. Been huntin' me ever since." Another shot cracked through the night, spitting dirt into Eliza's hair. Clara whimpered, burying her head in her sister's shoulder. Eliza gritted her teeth. It didn't matter if Thomas was guilty or not. Those men weren't here for justice, they were here for blood. "We can't hold 'em off forever," Silas said. "Best chance is to spook their horses." Eliza nodded grimly. "Go. I'll cover you." Silas gave her a look, quick, assessing. Then he was gone, a shadow among shadows. She waited, heart hammering, finger tight on the trigger. A sudden crack, a panicked neigh. Silas had done it. One of the riders' horses bolted, carrying its rider screaming into the night. Chaos erupted. Shouts. Shots fired blindly. Another horse tore loose. Silas returned, panting. "Go now while they're scatterin'." They didn't need telling twice. Eliza grabbed Clara's hand and ran, dragging her across the yard toward the house. Thomas stumbled behind them. Bullets whined through the dark. Something seared past Eliza's arm, close enough that her skin prickled with heat. They burst through the front door and slammed it shut. Silas tipped over a heavy table, barricading it. For a long moment, the world narrowed to their ragged breathing, the creak of wood settling. Then silence. Outside, the attackers regrouped, cursed, and, at last, retreated into the night. It was over. For now. In the kitchen, Thomas slumped into a chair, head in his hands. Clara hovered near him, wringing a cloth between her fingers. Eliza leaned against the wall, her rifle still clutched tight. She could feel the weight of Silas's gaze on her. Not judging. Not accusing. Just waiting. "That's it then," Eliza said finally, her voice low. "You brought death to our doorstep with your lies." Thomas looked up, desperate. "Please. I can make it right. Just give me time. I'll work, No," Eliza said. Her voice was steel now. "You're leavin' at first light." Thomas opened his mouth to argue but closed it again when he saw the set of her jaw. The matter was settled. That night Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat on the porch with Silas, watching the stars wheel across the velvet sky. Clara cried quietly inside the house, her dreams shattered. "You did right," Silas said after a long while. Eliza didn't answer. Right didn't feel like much when it came wrapped in heartbreak. "You ever think about leavin' this place?" she asked him, surprising herself. Silas shrugged. "No use runnin'. Trouble's got a way of findin' a man, no matter where he goes." She thought about that for a long time. At dawn, Thomas rode away, a sad figure shrinking against the rising sun. Clara didn't come out to watch him go. The ranch felt emptier after he left, but also lighter. Like breathing was a little easier. For a time, things settled. Silas and Eliza worked side by side, speaking little, understanding much. Clara slowly stitched her heart back together, tending the garden and the chickens with mechanical determination. It might have been enough. Until the day a stranger came riding into the yard, a battered black hat pulled low, a sheriff's star glinting on his chest. He rode easy, like a man with nothing to fear. But his eyes were cold. Calculating. "Name's Sheriff Langford," he said, swinging down from his horse. "Lookin' for a man named Silas Boone." Eliza froze. Beside her, she felt Silas stiffen. The sheriff smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "You're under arrest, Boone," he drawled. "Wanted in 3 counties for murder." The world tilted. Eliza stared at Silas, heart thudding painfully against her ribs. Silas didn't deny it. Didn't even flinch. He just met her gaze calm and steady. And in that moment, Eliza realized she might have invited something far worse than a few desperate rustlers into her home. She might have invited in a killer. The yard was so quiet, Eliza could hear the flies buzzing around the watering trough. Sheriff Langford stood tall in the dust, one hand resting casually on the butt of his revolver, the other holding a folded piece of paper. Wanted posters, no doubt. Silas didn't move. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. Clara peeked out from the porch, her eyes wide and fearful. Eliza instinctively stepped between her sister and the stranger. Langford unfolded the paper with a snap and held it up. The sketch was rough, but the grim set of the jaw and the cold, heavy-lidded eyes were unmistakable. It was Silas. Murder, Langford repeated, like the word itself was a hammer. Armed robbery. Assault. You're a busy man, Boone. Eliza's mind spun. Murderer. She wanted to turn away, to retreat inside, to lock every door and window. But Silas hadn't moved, hadn't reached for a weapon, hadn't so much as twitched. That stillness told her something. "What's your proof?" she demanded, surprising even herself. Langford tilted his head, amused. "Proof? Ain't no jury out here on the prairie, Mississippi. The law's my word, and Boone's trail of bodies." Silas finally spoke, his voice low, gravelly. "What town you sheriff of, Langford? Why? You think it matters where your rope comes from?" Langford sneered. Eliza caught the undercurrent. Something didn't fit. Silas's eyes never left Langford's face. "Funny thing," he said. "Last I heard, the only Langford lawman got thrown out of Fort Brannigan for talking bribes." "That you?" Langford's smile stiffened. His hand inched lower toward his pistol. "That's a lie," Langford said. "You gonna come quiet or we do this hard?" Silas shifted his weight subtly, ready for a fight. Eliza's heart climbed into her throat. She could almost feel the air around them growing heavier, tighter. "Wait," Eliza said, raising her hands. "No bloodshed. Not here." Langford's eyes flicked to her. He misread her fear for weakness. "Smart girl," he said, smirking. He made a mistake then. He stepped forward, cocky, hand closing around the pistol at his hip. Silas moved like lightning. A blur of motion. In one smooth pull, he yanked Langford's revolver free and tossed it into the watering trough. Before Langford could react, Silas had him pinned against the side of the barn, one arm twisted behind his back. Clara gasped. Eliza stood frozen, barely breathing. "You ain't no sheriff," Silas growled against the man's ear. "You're a bounty hunter. Tryin' to collect on old lies." Langford thrashed, but Silas held him fast. "You think killin' me's gonna make you a hero somewhere?" Silas hissed. The man didn't answer, just spat in the dust. Silas shoved him hard against the wall and stepped back. Eliza grabbed a coil of rope from the fence post and tossed it to Silas without a word. Together, they tied Langford's hands behind his back and dragged him into the barn, locking him in the tack room. Only when the heavy door shut did Eliza turn on Silas, her voice shaking with anger and betrayal. "You gonna tell me the truth now?" she demanded. Silas leaned against a post, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he looked tired. Not physically, something deeper, older. "I killed a man," he said at last. 3 years ago." The confession hit her like a slap. "Why?" she whispered. "He was huntin' women. Hurt my sister." Silas's voice cracked, rough with old pain. "No one would stop him. Not the sheriff, not the judge. So I did." The words hung heavy between them. Eliza stared at him, seeing not just the man he was, but the boy he must have been. Scared. Angry. Alone. "And after that?" she asked, voice barely audible. Silas shrugged. "Ran. Been runnin' ever since." Silence. Only the creak of the barn settling around them. Finally, Eliza exhaled, slow and steady. "I believe you," she said. Silas looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. Hope flickered in his weary eyes. But you can't stay here, she added. Not if men like him keep comin'. I won't put Clara through that. The hope dimmed but didn't die. I understand, he said simply. They agreed to keep Langford locked up for the night. In the morning, Silas would ride out with him, deliver him to the real law 2 towns over, and then keep going, farther west maybe. Somewhere no one knew his name. Clara didn't sleep that night, and neither did Eliza. Dawn broke slow and bloody across the sky. Silas saddled his horse, tying Langford to the second mount. Eliza stood by the porch, arms crossed, heart heavy. Silas tipped his hat to her, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. "Thank you," he said, "for believin' me, when no one else would." Eliza swallowed the lump in her throat. She managed a nod. Clara stayed inside. She couldn't bear the goodbye. With a final look, Silas swung into the saddle and rode off, leading Langford toward whatever justice, or injustice, awaited. Eliza watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then, slowly, she turned back to the ranch. Her ranch. Her sister. Her life. It would have to be enough. 2 weeks passed. The rains came, soft and steady, turning the parched fields green again. Calves were born healthy and strong. Life found a way to mend itself. But Eliza never forgot. One evening, as she repaired the fence near the western edge of the property, she noticed something half buried in the dirt, a scrap of paper, tattered and stained. Curious, she dug it out. It was another wanted poster. But not for Silas. This one showed Thomas. Alias, Everett Granger. Charges: fraud, theft, conspiracy. Eliza stared at it, her stomach turning. Thomas hadn't just been a man with a troubled past. He had been a liar to the bone. She crumpled the paper in her fist and tossed it into the fire that night. The past was the past. But it had teeth, and sometimes it bit hard. Weeks turned into months. Winter whispered its way across the plains, dusting the hills with snow. Eliza and Clara endured, stronger now, tempered by betrayal and loss. Sometimes, on clear nights, Eliza would stand on the porch, scanning the far horizon. Half hoping, half dreading she might see a lone rider cutting across the fields. But Silas never returned. Until one evening, just as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds, a figure rode into view. Alone. Slow. Weary. Eliza's heart leapt into her throat. She dropped her sewing, raced down the porch steps, boots thudding in the dirt. It was Silas. Different, somehow. Harder around the edges, but with the same steady fire in his eyes. He dismounted carefully, wincing as he favored one side. Without a word, Eliza closed the distance between them and threw her arms around his neck. He held her, solid and real, grounding her against the howling emptiness she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. After a long time, he pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "You still got room for a wanted man?" he asked, voice low, rough. Eliza laughed, a real laugh, cracked and beautiful. "Only if he knows how to mend fences," she said. Silas smiled, and it lit up all the dark corners she hadn't known were still hurting. Behind them, Clara peeked from the porch, a slow, cautious smile blossoming on her face. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ranch. And for the first time in a long, long while, Eliza believed they might just have a future after all. Winter sank its teeth into the prairie with a kind of slow, merciless patience. Frost crept up the window panes like ghostly fingers, and the wind never seemed to stop its low, mournful wail across the hills. Eliza pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and leaned against the porch rail, watching the horizon bleed into darkness. Inside, the fireplace crackled, throwing long shadows against the walls. Clara sat cross-legged by the hearth, reading aloud from a battered book, her voice a soft, steady thread in the heavy air. And Silas was mending tack, his fingers deft and sure despite the deep scars that mapped his knuckles. They were a family now, stitched together with secrets, survival, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. But something was coming. Eliza felt it in her bones, like the way animals sense a storm before it crests the hills. It started with the horses. One morning, they found the herd restless, stamping and tossing their heads at phantom sounds. Prints in the snow, boot tracks, half hidden, too many to count, circled the pasture. Not a passing traveler. A message. Silas knelt by the tracks, his face grim. "Riders," he said. "Maybe 6, maybe more. Campin' close." "Why?" Clara asked, voice small. He stood, brushing snow from his knees. His gaze met Eliza's. "Because men like Langford don't work alone," Silas said. "They got friends. Friends who want payback." Fear coiled tight in Eliza's chest, but she didn't let it show. She wouldn't let them lose everything again. They spent the day boarding up windows, checking the rifles, counting out what little ammunition they had. It wasn't much. Night fell heavy and absolute. The first shot shattered the stillness just after midnight. Eliza jerked awake, heart pounding. Clara screamed from the next room. Silas was already up, gun in hand, eyes hard and clear. Another shot. Closer this time. "They're flushin' us out," Silas said grim. "No," Eliza said, pulling on her boots. "We make our stand here." They doused the lamps, melted into the shadows of the house. Outside, hooves thundered past, men whooping and hollering like devils. Eliza peered through a crack in the boarded window and caught sight of them. Rough men, faces wrapped in scarves against the cold, rifles slung low. They weren't here to steal cattle. They were here to end things. The third shot punched through the doorframe inches from Eliza's head. She ducked back, adrenaline roaring in her ears. Silas returned fire, calm and measured. One shot. A scream outside. Then silence. For a moment the world held its breath. Then came the crash of booted feet against the door. It gave way with a splintering crack. The first man threw caught a bullet square in the chest. He dropped without a sound. Eliza swung the heavy butt of her rifle into the second man's jaw, sending him sprawling. Gunfire roared, deafening in the small space. Smoke filled the air, thick and acrid. Clara cowered under the kitchen table, clutching a carving knife in trembling hands. Silas fought like a man possessed, moving through the house with lethal grace. But there were too many. A rough hand seized Eliza by the hair, yanking her backward. She twisted, brought her knee up hard into her attacker's gut. He grunted, loosening his grip just enough for her to tear free and slam the butt of her rifle into his face. Blood sprayed the floorboards. Another man grabbed Clara, dragging her out from under the table. "No!" Eliza screamed, lunging forward. But before she could reach her, Silas was there. He drove his knife into the man's side, clean and quick. The man crumpled, Clara scrambling free. More gunshots outside. The night seethed with chaos. Eliza and Silas backed toward the stairs, Clara between them. "We can't hold them," Silas said grim. "We don't have to," Eliza panted. "We just have to survive till dawn." Another rider crashed through the front door. This one different. Younger. Slighter. His face bare, no scarf. Eliza recognized him. Tommy Granger. Thomas's younger brother. The one who used to flirt shyly with Clara at the general store. The boy who had helped load their wagons more times than she could count. He raised his rifle, hands shaking. "Don't make me do this," he said, voice cracking. Clara stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Tommy, you don't have to," she said. "You know us. You know we ain't done nothin' wrong." For a moment, everything froze. Tommy's hands trembled. The rifle wavered. And then he lowered it. "Go," he said hoarsely. "Out the back. Hurry." Eliza didn't hesitate. She grabbed Clara's hand and bolted for the kitchen door, Silas covering them. They burst into the frozen night, breath steaming in the air. Gunfire erupted behind them as the men realized their prey was escaping. They ran for the barn, the snow dragging at their feet, the cold slicing like knives. Inside the barn, they slammed the doors shut and barred them. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing, the horses' nervous snorts. Silas grabbed a lantern, smashed it against the hayloft. Flames leapt high, crackling hungrily. "What are you doing?" Clara cried. "Cover," Silas said, voice like iron. "Smoke'll drive 'em back." Already the fire was catching, thick smoke billowing toward the rafters. They mounted up, coughing, eyes streaming. Eliza's horse reared, wild-eyed, but she held firm. With a shout, they kicked the doors open and charged into the night, a wall of smoke and fire behind them. Bullets whizzed past. One clipped Silas's arm, but he didn't falter. They rode hard, cutting across the fields, plunging into the dark woods beyond. Behind them, the ranch blazed like a funeral pyre, lighting up the sky. Eliza didn't look back. She couldn't. They rode until the horses could go no farther. Deep in the woods, they finally slowed, gasping, battered, alive. Silas slumped in his saddle, blood staining his sleeve. Eliza slid down and helped him to the ground. Clara hovered, pale and silent. "We need to get him warm," Eliza said. They built a rough shelter from branches and snow, started a fire with what little they had left. All night, Eliza sat by Silas's side, pressing cloth to his wound, willing him to live. By morning, the fever broke. Silas opened his eyes, weak but alive. "You ain't gettin' rid of me that easy," he rasped. Eliza laughed through her tears. They were alive. But the ranch, their home, was gone. Ashes and memories. And yet, as the sun rose over the shattered landscape, painting the snow in soft golds and pinks, Eliza felt something fierce and unbreakable stir inside her. Hope. They would rebuild. Somewhere. Somehow. Because family wasn't a place. It was people. It was stubborn hearts refusing to break, even when the world tried its damnedest. Weeks later, they found a new patch of land 2 valleys over. Rougher. Wilder. But it was theirs. They built with their own hands, cabin, corral, barn. The first calf born on the new land was a scrawny, stubborn thing that nearly died in the snow. They named him Miracle. It felt right. Some nights, as the fire crackled and the wind howled against the walls, Eliza would sit with Clara and Silas and watch the flames dance. She still carried the scars. So did they. But scars were proof of survival. Proof of a life fought for and won. One evening, Silas pulled a small, battered tin from his coat. Inside was a simple iron ring. No jewels. No frills. Just strength. "Marry me," he said, voice steady. Not a question. A promise. Eliza didn't hesitate. She slipped the ring onto her finger, feeling it settle there like it had always belonged. They kissed, soft and sure, the firelight wrapping them in its warm, flickering arms. Outside, the snow fell quietly, blanketing the world in a clean, new silence. A fresh start. And maybe, just maybe, a happy ending.